Nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what happened next. Not the reporters scribbling notes furiously, not the lawyers pacing nervously, and certainly not T himself. Because when the judge finally spoke, everything changed. This wasn't a standard verdict, a predictable sentence, or something anyone could brace for mentally. No, it was a shock so sudden, so jarring, that even those who had been following the trial day after day, week after week, were left frozen in disbelief. At the center of it all stood T, a man who had spent years carefully building an image of power, influence, and absolute control. Someone who seemed untouchable, a master of strategy and perception. And suddenly, in one instant, all of that authority vanished. He was exposed, stripped of the persona he had meticulously constructed, confronted with a reality that was entirely beyond his control. Multiple insiders present in the courtroom report that the energy in the room shifted the moment the sentence was read. First came silence, a heavy, suffocating quiet that made the air feel almost tangible. People exchanged glances, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to react. Then T's response broke through, and it was nothing anyone had anticipated. Instead of retreating into despair or maintaining his calculated composure, he reacted explosively. Sources describe it as a moment so raw, so intense, that even the people in the courtroom froze, uncertain whether to intervene or let the moment unfold. One insider said it didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. The walls, the formalities, the decorum, they all seemed to vanish. What remained was chaos contained in human form. It was the kind of moment that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about the person at the center of it all. This was not a minor setback. This was a high-profile figure facing a sentence with the potential to completely reshape his life, career, finances, reputation, and family all hanging in the balance. When that level of pressure lands at once, there are only two options: you break or you snap. According to whispers from those inside the room, T snapped. And the aftermath, sources say, may have been even more intense than the sentence itself. Alleged outbursts, heated exchanges, and at one point, security intervention reportedly marked the moments immediately following the verdict. It was a level of tension rarely seen in a courtroom, especially one so accustomed to high-profile figures navigating legal battles with poise. So what did the judge say that provoked this response? Multiple sources described the sentence as insane. Even those who had followed every development were left stunned. In the few minutes after the verdict, whispers, gasps, and scattered murmurs spread through the room, leaving journalists scrambling to capture the unfolding drama. The magnitude of what was happening was almost impossible to document in real time. To truly understand why this moment hit so hard, you have to look beyond the immediate events. You have to examine the image T had carefully built over years, a persona that was not just about fame, music, or wealth, but about influence, control, and calculated precision. Every move, every interview, every social media post had been intentional, strategically designed to project strength and foresight. He was seen as someone who could anticipate outcomes, navigate obstacles, and maintain control, even under extreme pressure. T's reputation wasn't limited to entertainment. It was about leadership, authority, and dominance. People believed he could handle any storm, sidestep any trap, and maintain command over every aspect of his life. But no matter how strong or prepared someone may seem, there are moments where control slips, moments where everything flips. And this case, according to insiders, was that moment for T. The situation didn't appear overnight. It began quietly, with subtle reports, minor mentions, and whispers that rarely made headlines. Investigations, questions, and scrutiny accumulated slowly, building pressure like a sealed container waiting to burst. Those closest to the situation noticed it early. They whispered, observed, and prepared. The public, however, remained largely unaware until the storm finally erupted in full view. Instead of immediately addressing the situation publicly, T allegedly maintained silence. Some say this was deliberate, a calculated decision to observe and strategize before reacting. Others believe he underestimated how fast the details would surface. Either way, the silence did nothing to prevent the unfolding crisis. It amplified it. When the information finally reached the public, it did so like a tidal wave. Headlines erupted across every platform. Blogs dissected every angle. Reaction channels flooded feeds with commentary, speculation, and analysis. Even people who hadn't been following the case before suddenly found themselves immersed, captivated by the drama. And why? Until the moment in the courtroom, T maintained an appearance of composure. There was no public display of panic, no indication that defeat was even possible. Up until that moment, he seemed untouchable, confident that he could navigate any challenge. The courtroom, however, stripped all of that away. Every carefully curated layer of control crumbled. Every calculated move, every public display of authority, every nuance of his meticulously crafted persona vanished in an instant. For those observing, it was astonishing to witness a figure so accustomed to power confront a situation entirely beyond his control. The build-up to that moment was as critical as the verdict itself. This wasn't an overnight event. The tension had been simmering for months, quietly accumulating behind the scenes. Subtle leaks, whispered rumors, and minor hints of missteps had circulated quietly. Some sources suggest T underestimated the scope, believing his experience and influence could shield him. Others claim he was fully aware but believed he could navigate the system strategically. Either way, the pressure intensified steadily, leading to an inevitable breaking point. Once the trial formally began, the stakes only grew higher. Every statement, every testimony, every legal argument carried extraordinary weight. Observers were on edge. The courtroom was tense, charged with the weight of reputation, legacy, and public perception. T, despite appearances, was balancing the enormous pressures of personal, professional, and legal consequences against a system that could surprise him at any moment. And then the verdict was read. Instantly, the dynamics shifted completely. Observers describe a silence so thick it felt almost physical, followed by a reaction that defied expectations. This was not despair, not composure. It was raw, explosive energy. Allegedly, it included heated exchanges and intense emotion, moments that required security to step in. The courtroom became a crucible, a space where personal pressure, public expectation, and legal reality collided. Those watching knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. It was the rare moment when a high-profile figure, usually in command of perception and influence, was revealed in a state of vulnerability and volatility. The courtroom moment would become the dominant talking point across social media for days, even weeks, fueling speculation, analysis, and commentary. Social media erupted almost instantly. Clips of the reaction circulated widely, sparking debates about composure, accountability, and the human side of celebrity. Blogs analyzed body language, behavior, and context. Every observer, from casual fans to industry insiders, attempted to piece together what had happened and what it might mean for the future. The courtroom drama transcended its walls, becoming a cultural phenomenon in real time. And yet, despite the chaos, the underlying story remained the same. No matter how much control you think you have, no matter how carefully you construct a persona, life can deliver moments that strip it all away. For T, this was one of those moments. A confrontation with reality that left an indelible mark on his life, his image, and the public perception of him as a figure of power and control. It's also important to note the psychological dimension. T's reaction wasn't just about the sentence. It was about the collapse of an identity he had meticulously built over decades. The composure, strategy, and control that defined him had been disrupted in one irrevocable moment. And that's why people describe the atmosphere in the courtroom as tense, unpredictable, and electric. Even after the initial shock, T maintained an aura of control. He didn't panic publicly, but insiders describe a quiet, calculating energy. The explosive reaction was over, but the strategic assessment, the mental recalibration, had just begun. In situations like this, That kind of silent calculation is often far more telling than the outward display of emotion. It suggests that the person is already planning their next move, determining how to reclaim power or navigate the fallout. And the fallout, it wasn't long in coming. Social media, always hungry for drama, exploded. Commentary, speculation, and analysis flooded platforms. Every tweet, post, and thread dissected the verdict, T's reaction, and what it meant for his career and legacy. People debated endlessly. Did he handle it correctly? Was this a crack in his image of invincibility? Could he recover, or was this the beginning of an irreversible decline? Because here's the truth. This wasn't just about one courtroom verdict. It was about the public perception of power, control, and influence. It was about the moment when a carefully curated persona met a reality too intense to manage. And that collision, between expectation and reality, between image and truth, created a spectacle that captivated the public imagination. Now, as T and those close to H, I process the consequences. The story continues to evolve. Legal battles, media narratives, and public debate are all intertwined. Every statement, or absence of a statement, becomes a signal, a clue, or a calculated move. And while outsiders analyze and speculate, T faces the challenge of navigating both the courtroom aftermath and the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. In the end, this moment isn't just about the sentence. It's about control, influence, and the fragility of reputation. It's about how a single instant can strip away decades of strategy, preparation, and perceived invincibility. And as the world watches, the question remains, how will T respond next? Will he reclaim control? Will he adapt to the new reality? Or will this moment mark a turning point he never anticipated? Because one thing is clear, nobody in that courtroom, or on social media for that matter, was prepared for what happened next. And the story, far from over, is only getting started. Nobody in that courtroom was ready for what was about to unfold. Not the reporters, hunched over their notebooks, anticipating quotes and reactions. Not the lawyers who had meticulously planned every argument, every objection, every counter-strategy. And certainly not T himself, a man whose entire career was built on calculated control and a carefully curated image. Because the moment the judge's words echoed through the room, everything shifted in an instant. It wasn't a small shift. It wasn't a minor ripple. This was seismic, a shock so profound that even those who had been following the case from the start were left speechless, staring at the floor, the ceiling, or each other, trying to comprehend the reality that had just landed in front of them. And at the epicenter stood T, the man who had spent years mastering perception, influence, and power. The one who seemed untouchable, the one who always seemed 2 steps ahead. Suddenly, in a single instant, all of that disappeared. According to multiple insiders, the second the sentence was read, the energy in the courtroom shifted. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't polite, it was immediate. Silence fell first, thick, almost suffocating, the kind that presses against your chest and makes your ears ring. People exchanged glances, some confused, some horrified, some trying to read the expressions of others to see if they were imagining what they had just heard. But then came T's reaction, and it was unlike anything anyone could have expected. Sources describe it as explosive. Not quiet frustration, not subtle disbelief. A reaction so raw, so intense, that people in the courtroom reportedly froze, unsure whether to intervene or simply step back and watch. One insider even said it didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. The walls, the polished wood, the judge's gavel, the cameras, all of it seemed to vanish in that instant. All that remained was tension, unpredictability, and the undeniable sense that something very significant was about to happen. This wasn't just a verdict. This wasn't a routine sentencing. This was T, a high-profile figure whose life, career, reputation, and influence were all on the line, being confronted with an outcome he could not control. And when that type of pressure lands all at once, there are only 2 possible reactions. You break or you snap. According to those closest to the events, T snapped. But here's where it gets even more astonishing. Some insiders now claim that the moments following his reaction were even more dramatic than the sentence itself. Alleged outbursts, sharp words, heated exchanges. Moments so charged that security reportedly had to step in. Chairs shifted, voices raised. People turned their heads trying to figure out what was happening. It was chaotic, tense, and gripping, and the entire courtroom seemed suspended between disbelief and danger. The real question, of course, is this. What exactly did the judge say to provoke such a reaction? Multiple accounts describe the sentence as insane, a term not thrown around lightly in legal circles. For those who had been tracking every motion, every brief, every delay, the verdict was unthinkable. And in the seconds that followed, the courtroom seemed to collectively realize something important. This wasn't going the way anyone had anticipated. To truly understand why that moment hit so hard, we have to step back, not just a few days, but years, to the image T had spent decades constructing. This wasn't just another rapper facing legal scrutiny. T had built a persona of strategy, intelligence, and unshakable composure. Every word, every public appearance, every action was intentional. He cultivated the idea that he understood the system, that he could navigate its traps, that he could always emerge unscathed. For years, he had projected confidence, authority, and foresight. The public, the media, even other figures in the industry believed T always had a plan, always knew the next step, always held counter. And for the longest time, that was true. He had mastered the art of perception, giving people the impression of being untouchable, calculated, and always 3 steps ahead. But the courtroom moment proved a fundamental truth. No matter how much control you think you have, a single moment can overturn everything. And according to insiders, this case was that moment for T. The situation didn't just appear overnight. It started quietly, with whispers, minor reports, subtle investigations that barely made it into the public eye. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building, the system was turning, and those in the inner circle knew something significant was coming. Interestingly, instead of confronting the issue publicly, T allegedly stayed silent, deliberate, calculated. Some believed he assumed the storm would pass. Others suggest he understood more than he was revealing. Either way, the silence didn't prevent the situation from escalating. It intensified it. Once the story finally reached the public, it didn't trickle in slowly. It erupted. Headlines proliferated, blogs analyzed every angle, social media erupted. People who had previously been indifferent were now fully captivated. Yet despite the media frenzy, T maintained a composed front. Publicly, he did not panic. He continued projecting confidence, a belief that he could control the narrative. Up until that courtroom moment, no one would have guessed he was bracing for defeat. His posture, his expressions, his interactions, all maintained the illusion of mastery. But that illusion was shattered in one instant. The days leading up to the sentencing were themselves filled with tension and unpredictability. Legal teams moved back and forth. Last-minute discussions were held behind closed doors, and strategic decisions were made at every turn. Insiders claim that while T appeared outwardly calm, the reality behind the scenes was very different. There were late-night meetings, frustrated exchanges, moments of doubt even among those closest to him. And perhaps the most surprising element was the shared belief that the outcome wouldn't be as severe as it ultimately was. They expected consequences, yes, but not the scale of what unfolded. This expectation, or perhaps overconfidence, played a role in how everything hit him inside that courtroom. Walking in with one set of expectations, only to have reality slam into you in a completely different form, magnifies the shock. The courtroom itself, according to multiple reports, was heavy with anticipation. You could feel the tension the moment you stepped inside. The reporters poised, the lawyers focused, the spectators silently bracing. Everyone sensed that something major was about to unfold. T sat there, outwardly composed, but insiders report that his energy was off, subtle but noticeable. Something wasn't right. Perhaps he was aware that the situation was more precarious than anyone realized, or perhaps he was just human, feeling the weight of what was to come. Whatever it was, the moment the judge began speaking, everything shifted. What started as a standard reading quickly turned into a dramatic scene none could have predicted. The shift in the room's energy was palpable, and as the words were uttered, T's understanding of the situation crumbled. There was a brief, almost cinematic pause immediately after the sentence was read. Absolute silence. No movement, no whispers, just the collective shock of everyone in the room. And in that silence, all eyes turned to T. The question lingered in the air. How would he respond? Would he maintain composure? Would he break down? Would he say anything at all? For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though he might hold it together. But then the weight of the sentence hit. The control he had maintained for years, the image he had projected, the persona he had built slipped. And what followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Witnesses claimed T's demeanor transformed in real time. Calmness vanished, composure shattered. In its place came intensity, raw emotion, and explosive reaction. What had been under wraps for so long now poured out. Chairs shifted, voices rose. The room vibrated with a new energy, one that was unpredictable and alarming. One insider described it as watching someone have their entire reality collapse in front of them, unable to contain the shock. What exactly was said? That's where the story becomes chaotic. Multiple accounts exist. Some say T stood abruptly, visibly shaken, confronting the judge with words laced in disbelief and anger. Others claim his initial reaction was physical, gestures, sudden movement, a tension that forced security to step in immediately. And then came the words, sharp, emotional, unfiltered. One viral account claims T shouted, "This don't make sense. Y'all already made your decision before I even walked in here." Whether verbatim or not, the essence was clear. He had lost composure. That moment changed everything. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It had become a scene, a spectacle, something people would replay and analyze endlessly. And just when security began moving to restore order, T's reaction took an unexpected turn. What started as emotional expression quickly became a series of pointed statements and accusations, hinting that the outcome may have been predetermined. According to whispers, he suggested that the decision had been made before the hearing even began. Some witnesses claimed T had to be physically guided out, still arguing loudly, refusing to calm down even as security personnel circled around him. Others reported that his final words before leaving were not directed at the judge, not even at the jury, but at someone else entirely, a detail that immediately ignited rampant speculation. Who was he looking at? Who was he addressing? And why did that silent exchange or that glance carry such weight? The questions were immediate and urgent, and the public began piecing together fragments of a story that had already spun out of control. Social media responded almost instantaneously. Within hours, TikTok edits, YouTube breakdowns, Twitter threads, and fan speculation had turned a courtroom reaction into a viral event. Insider details, some verified, some unconfirmed, circulated at lightning speed. One phrase began trending relentlessly: insane sentence. It captured the mood of the moment: disbelief, outrage, confusion, and it amplified the pressure on T's team to respond. And respond they did. According to multiple sources, T's camp moved quickly, almost preemptively. Statements were drafted, lawyers consulted. Internal discussions were held about the next steps. While the public was still processing the viral clips, strategic moves were already underway behind closed doors. Every action suggested that this wasn't a moment of defeat, it was a calculated pause before the next phase. Later that day, a report surfaced claiming, again unofficially, that the sentence T received might not be final. The claim suggested that discussions about appeals and legal strategies were already in motion, that plans were being prepared to challenge the outcome before it could become set in stone. If even a fraction of that were true, the courtroom scene had been only the beginning, a precursor to a legal and public battle that could redefine the narrative entirely. The online reaction was immediate. Fans, commentators, and curious observers flooded the threads. Comments reflected disbelief, defiance, and speculation. He's not going out like that. This ain't over. If he's got a plan, things are about to get ugly. The energy shifted from shock and outrage to anticipation. The public wasn't just watching. They were invested, waiting for the next move, scanning every statement, every social media post, and every leak for clues about what T would do next. And then another twist emerged, one that caught even the most attentive observers off guard. According to a supposed insider leak that began circulating late at night, there may have been something said during the hearing itself that never made it into the official summaries. Something last minute, unexpected, and potentially game-changing. The whispers suggested that right before the sentence was finalized, new information had been introduced, something that shifted the perspective of those inside the courtroom. Information that could explain why T's reaction was so extreme. Of course, all of this remains unverified. There is no official record of last-minute developments or disclosures, but the mere possibility was enough to intensify the speculation. If true, then T's explosive reaction wasn't just about emotion or frustration. It was a strategic response to revelations that the public hadn't seen and may never fully see. The implications were staggering. What the world had witnessed online might be only half of the story, with critical context remaining hidden. Questions quickly multiplied. What was that information? Why wasn't it reported? Who was aware of it before it reached T? The possibility of unseen developments transformed the narrative from a viral spectacle into a complex web of legal intrigue, public scrutiny, and psychological tension. Suddenly, the event wasn't just about one man's reaction. It was about the system itself, the unseen forces at work, and the unpredictability of high-stakes legal battles. Meanwhile, another subtle but significant detail emerged. Observers noticed T's social media remained completely silent. No posts, no reactions, no public statements. Ordinarily, such silence might have gone unnoticed, but after everything that had transpired, that silence was deafening. The absence of commentary created space for speculation. Was he plotting a strategy, delegating communications to his legal team, sending a message to those watching from the shadows? Fans and commentators alike read meaning into every pause, interpreting silence as prelude to action. Tension deepened. When someone transitions from explosive emotion to calculated silence, it is often a signal, something is coming, and the public waited with bated breath for that next signal. Every second of inactivity on social media, every delay in official statements, added layers to the speculation. The anticipation was almost palpable, part fascination, part anxiety. It felt like watching a high-stakes game unfold in real time, one where the next move could change everything. The final twist of this saga came in the form of a single post that appeared briefly on a private forum before spreading across multiple social media platforms. The post was cryptic, indirect, but loaded with implication. It didn't confirm legal maneuvers or disclose strategy. It simply hinted that T was not done, that the story had only reached its midpoint, and that observers should expect developments that could shock, unsettle, and change the narrative once again. Even without confirmation, the post amplified the tension. The story was no longer just about a courtroom outburst. It was about the anticipation of a larger, unfolding strategy, an escalation that could redefine perceptions of control, power, and consequence. From a public perspective, the events were immediate, visceral, and shareable. Clips circulated, sound bites spread, and hashtags trended. The spectacle of T's reaction dominated online conversation. But for those closer to the situation, there was a deeper layer: legal maneuvers, strategic planning, and calculated decision-making behind the scenes. The viral moments were only a surface reflection of a complex and ongoing process. In essence, the narrative had evolved on two parallel tracks. The first was the viral, emotional public reaction, an outburst that people could see, hear, and discuss immediately. The second was the quieter, strategic story, one filled with speculation, uncertainty, and potential implications that hadn't yet reached the public eye. Both tracks, however, reinforced one reality: this situation was far from over. It wasn't merely about what happened in that courtroom. It was about what comes next, and the world was now waiting, collectively holding its breath. T's silence, the viral clips, the speculative leaks, and the public's relentless questioning created an environment where anticipation became almost unbearable. Every action or inaction was scrutinized, every detail magnified. Observers on social media debated motives, intentions, and next moves, while traditional media attempted to verify claims, contextualize the outburst, and understand the legal implications. Yet with so many unknowns, the narrative continued to spiral, unpredictable and dynamic. Ultimately, the courtroom explosion was only the first chapter. The subsequent hours, marked by viral content, social media speculation, and insider whispers, established a sense of uncertainty and suspense that would define the story in the weeks and months to come. Every observer, every fan, every analyst was forced to confront one inescapable question: what will T do next? Because if the courtroom outburst revealed anything, it was that he had not yet revealed the full extent of his strategy, his response, or his plan for reclaiming control. And in that uncertainty lies the tension, the fascination, and the potential danger. Every narrative thread, from unverified leaks to viral posts, feeds into a growing anticipation of what is to come. The world is no longer reacting merely to a sentence. It is waiting, watching, and analyzing every move, every pause, every hint of action. What began as a courtroom spectacle has transformed into an ongoing saga, a story that refuses to conclude until the next chapter is revealed. After all the chaos, the internet didn't just calm down, it escalated. In the middle of the storm, a single cryptic message appeared online briefly and then disappeared. It read, "Y'all saw the reaction, but y'all don't know the reason. When the truth comes out, everything is going to look different." No name attached, no verification, just those words. And somehow that was enough. Enough to make people pause, enough to make them speculate, enough to keep the story alive. That single fleeting line was like a spark in dry tinder. It wasn't confirmation, it wasn't evidence, but it carried weight that kept everyone watching and questioning. People realized almost instinctively that this story was far from over. If there really was more behind what happened in that courtroom, if critical details were still hidden, if there was a reason behind T's explosive reaction that nobody had revealed, then the next chapter of this saga might be bigger than anything the public had already witnessed. The moment the courtroom details hit the internet, the reaction wasn't just loud, it was overwhelming. Social media was flooded. Every platform, every timeline, every comment section was instantly dominated by the same question: what just happened to T? Twitter, now X, became a battlefield. Hashtags like TI sentence, Justice or Setup, and Free T started trending within minutes. Posts poured in at a pace that made the situation feel like it had been detonated into the public sphere. Some users expressed disbelief, others anger. Still others questioned the legitimacy of the sentence entirely. One viral tweet seemed to capture the collective confusion perfectly. "Ain't no way that sentence is real. Something's not adding up." That single post sparked a chain reaction. Replies, theories, and debates flooded in, stretching across hours, blurring the line between legal analysis, personal opinion, and outright speculation. Almost immediately, another response appeared. "Nah, y'all only shocked because it's T. If it was somebody else, nobody would care." Just like that, the internet divided. Factions formed almost instantly. On one side were those defending T, insisting the sentence was harsh, disproportionately so, and possibly influenced by factors beyond public knowledge. Comments like "this feels targeted," and "they made an example out of him," gained traction quickly, amplified by hundreds of users within hours. The narrative among supporters was clear. There was more to this story than what the public had been told. On the other side, critics refused to give T any special treatment. They argued that fame doesn't put someone above the law, that justice should be blind, and that assumptions of bias or targeting were premature. Posts like "stop acting like fame changes the law," and "we don't know the full story" maybe it's justified spread rapidly. The tension between factions escalated, creating a digital battlefield of opinions, each side digging in deeper. It wasn't just fans fueling the debate. Once the social media frenzy gained momentum, industry insiders, commentators, and even artists began weighing in indirectly. Subtweets flew like arrows. One artist remarked, "System don't hit everybody the same. Just remember that." Minutes later, another replied, "Or maybe people just don't see everything behind the scenes." Suddenly, the conversation had multiple layers. Legal debate, public perception, and insider hints suggesting complexities hidden from view. A well-known media personality then entered the fray with a deceptively simple observation. What happened today wasn't just about one man. It's about how fast everything can flip when the narrative changes. That single statement sent the discussion into overdrive. It reframed the story, not merely about a sentence, but about control, perception, and the fragility of public image. In an instant, a courtroom moment had evolved into a conversation about narrative power, the speed of information, and the volatility of public opinion. The tension deepened further when a so-called insider claiming connections to legal circles posted a thread that went viral almost immediately. The messages were vague but tantalizing. One line read, "I'm not saying the sentence was wrong, but what happened behind the scenes is way more complicated than what's being reported. Factors exist that haven't come out yet." That single thread became a magnet for curiosity. Thousands shared it, generating countless replies, theories, and new questions. What were those hidden factors? Why hadn't they been disclosed? And most importantly, would they ever be revealed? The online discourse escalated quickly, spilling into YouTube. Content creators produced hour-by-hour breakdowns, each with thumbnails of shocked faces and titles like "This doesn't make sense," "T setup," or "The truth behind the sentence revealed." Every video added a new theory, perspective, or unverified insider claim. Some speculated on last-minute courtroom developments, others questioned the judge's motives, and a few suggested systemic bias. Each layer intensified the narrative, making it feel more complex and more volatile. Viewers stayed engaged, continuously sharing, reacting, and theorizing. Amid all this chaos, T remained silent. No posts, no videos, no statements. Ordinarily, silence might not carry weight, but in this context, it spoke volumes. Observers interpreted it in myriad ways. Was he planning his next move? Letting lawyers handle matters strategically? Waiting for the right moment to strike publicly? The lack of communication became its own story. Some voices demanded clarity. Why isn't he saying anything? If it's wrong, speak up. Silence isn't helping. Others pushed back. He doesn't owe y'all anything. Let him handle it legally. Y'all just want drama. The divisions grew deeper. The debate evolved beyond the sentence itself into larger questions about public expectations, legal transparency, and celebrity responsibility. People weren't just discussing legality, they were debating norms. How should public figures respond under pressure? What is owed to fans versus private life? How much control does fame grant, and how much accountability is expected? And just when the conversation seemed to plateau, another wave of reactions amplified it further. High-profile voices, typically quiet on controversies, began dropping cryptic hints. Their comments weren't explicit, but they were enough to make observers pause. One post went viral. "This isn't finished. This is just the beginning of a longer fight." The word "beginning" reframed everything. Up to that point, people had been reacting to events that had already occurred: the courtroom shock, the viral tweets, the debates. But now anticipation took center stage. The audience shifted from passive observers to active participants, analyzing every post, replaying courtroom reactions, and trying to predict what would happen next. Questions multiplied. Will there be an appeal? Will more details or footage surface? Will T finally speak publicly, or is someone else controlling the narrative from behind the scenes? Could this be the start of a larger confrontation that reshapes public perception entirely? The uncertainty created a tension that felt almost tangible, as if the internet itself were holding its breath. As the hours passed, each new development intensified the pressure. Tweets, threads, and YouTube videos continued to layer theories upon theories. Even subtle subtweets from artists or insiders were dissected, replayed, and debated endlessly. What had begun as a courtroom shock had morphed into a full-blown cultural conversation about law, perception, fame, and power. The viral frenzy transformed the narrative into a living, evolving story that no single individual could fully control. Even the silence from T, once seemingly neutral, became an active element of the story. It fueled speculation, demanded interpretation, and gave the public a stage to project their own theories. Every pause was analyzed, every delayed response dissected. It was clear that control had shifted, from the courtroom to social media, from the figure in question to the global audience consuming, reacting, and debating in real time. Ultimately, this wasn't just a story about a legal sentence. It had become a reflection on the speed at which narratives can change, the fragility of public perception, and the pressure on public figures to navigate both law and image simultaneously. What began as a single moment in a courtroom had evolved into a multi-layered drama, one where fans, critics, insiders, and observers all participated in shaping the story. And the most striking aspect, the story was far from over. The next clip, the next insider thread, the next subtle post from a high-profile voice could shift everything again. In this case, uncertainty wasn't just a byproduct, it was the defining element. Each second of silence, each unexplained action, and each cryptic comment added fuel to a fire that would continue to burn online, ensuring that the conversation and the tension remained at a fever pitch. In short, the internet was no longer reacting to a verdict. It was reacting to the unpredictability of narrative, the volatility of perception, and the unfolding human drama at the heart of it all. And in a digital age where information spreads faster than any courtroom, the story wasn't simply unfolding. It was evolving, twisting, and pulling millions of people into a conversation they couldn't step away from.